This is an interview with Sigurd Hoff. The date is June 19th, 1994, and we're in his home in Fort Qu'Appelle, Saskatchewan. Good afternoon, Sigurd.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Oh, very good.
Pretty good. Yeah, you sound good. You're coming through loud and clear on my earphones. Thank you very much for agreeing to take some time to chat with me today about your work as a landscape designer and landscape architect here in Saskatchewan. I wonder if we could begin with asking some questions, please, about your background. Where were you born?
In Norway, in a country town in Norway.
Uh-huh.
And I grew up and was raised on an island out in the North Sea.
Oh, really?
Where we had direct contact with England, you know. During the war, there was boats going back and forth all the time.
Huh. I'm getting funny sounds from these headphones. What town was that?
Tønsberg is the name of the town.
Oh, there we go. I'm sorry. I think we're going to have to... What year did that happen? Okay. What was the name of the town, sorry?
Tønsberg, T-O-N-S.
T?
T-O-N-S. T-O-N-S. B-E-R-G. B-E-R-G. That's the oldest town in Norway.
Huh. And that was on the island?
Yeah, that's part of the island, part of that mainland.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
And when were you born? What's your birthday?
1912, 5th of September.
Okay. So did you go to school there? Was that?
Yeah, we had a good public school and high school. And when I finished high school, I was very mounted there what to do, because I had an older brother and a younger sister, and they were very smart. I was the black sheep, you know, but I passed high school, and I had a teacher who was an artist as well, and he took myself and a couple of other misfits and taught us painting, oil painting and aquarelle painting. And since then, I always said I am basically a painter, but I just been sidetracked into landscape architecture. and that sidetrack was that I tried to find out where the different school was, and it was an agricultural high school. The name is very difficult because it's spelled A-A-S and pronounced Ås. There was a 3-year course in a number of agriculture vocations, like regular farming, dairy farming, forestry, and landscape. It was really horticulture, but gradually they had developed a landscape architect course, and there was a very outstanding teacher. His name was Olav Moen, M-O-A-N. And I think he had practiced landscape architects out in the world. He's been in England and Switzerland and Italy and different places. And he knew history of landscape architects out and in, you know. And he taught us. He was a kind of rough person, and he didn't get along very well with architects and engineers and agriculture people, for that matter. But he taught us the basic things. That he reminded me so much of Roberto Bulmax, you know, because he is exactly the same thing. But no, this was a 3-year course. We started out with basic science, mathematics, physics, chemistry, botany, and microbiology and those things. They're very interesting. I have a my youngest son has a daughter, which is our granddaughter. She is now 20 years old, and she started to a course in landscape architecture, and so very interesting in UBC, and I follow her step by step, you know. And
what is her name?
Her name is Ingrid Hoff.
Oh.
And you'll meet her very soon. She's working now part-time at Van Dusen Garden, and she's second year in university. And we, you know, once in a while we go out there and visit them, and she comes here. So that we had exactly the same thing, really, because the first year we had basic sciences. Second year we started horticulture and went through all details about horticulture. Third year we branched out. I took landscape architecture. Others took fruit growing or vegetable growing or flower growing, something like that. But we were 3 or 4 of us that took landscape architecture. And when he graduated, there was in 38, and the conditions in Norway and other countries was very poor. It was just before the war broke out, you know, and there was no jobs to do. So we went to Germany and worked with Speth in Berlin. Speth, Louis Speth. There's a very famous. Every landscaper know Louis Speth because there's some dialects that is called Andenken and Louis Speth. Oh. Yeah. So we worked there, and then they did landscaping all over Europe, and they said they had a big project in Budapest. Just a minute. Oh, I can. Oh, yeah. No. I'll show you that later. Okay. But in Budapest, Hungary, there was an island out in Donau. The Donau going by this island. You have Pest on one side or Buda on the other side. Oh, yes. And I came there, and there was a job waiting for me, you know. They had communicated. And I worked there that year.
So this would be 1938.
Yeah, the 1838, yeah. And then the war, we heard rumors from the war coming, and so I went back to Scandinavia. No, I had already worked for a year with the landscape architect. His name is Sven Hermelin. Sven Hermelin, he's a very well-known landscape within IFLA. He was one of the starters of IFLA, and he was an outstanding landscape architect, a teacher. And I got the chance to work for him one summer, and then when the war broke out, I went back there and I worked with him. So, and then, you know.
Would he be in Oslo then?
Or no, that was in Stockholm. But then I got a job with the town of Oslo. When I had worked for him for a year, then and that was just during the war, you know. And there's nothing much to do for a landscape architect. We did cemeteries, and we helped people growing vegetables. We took big patches of parks, laid out, put in water, and gave them seeds and plants and everything, so they could grow their own food. So that was my. Meanwhile, we got married in Stockholm, and we had 5 children. Bang, 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 bang. We had 5 children. And we moved I had a good job with the city. I built a beautiful house, had a friend who is an architect to design it, and we enjoyed it with a whole landscape architect organization out to do landscaping. And we enjoyed it really those years, and we had very good friends in Oslo. And
would there have been an organization of landscape architects that you belonged to?
yeah, it was. It was. When I graduated, there was a small group of 5 or 6 people that were real landscape architects. One woman that did very well, and then fairly young people. That was all the landscape architects. No, there's 30. There's more than 30, I think, in Norway, but at that time it was. But we got together regularly, and I don't know how to. We did a lot of things together. We had competitions, arranged competitions, and I won some of them. And then we went out together and looked at sites and things like that, you know.
Good.
Yeah, and then we had regular meetings, and I don't know how to explain it. That is something it lacks here in Canada, that we work together. I don't think you people do more out of Ottawa, and they do from Calgary or Regina or anywhere. People are afraid of meeting colleagues and see what they are doing and things like that. And in Vancouver, it's still much worse, you know. They're fighting about every job that comes up. There is fighting about it. So
it's difficult when you're trying to make a living at it, and you have to compete to get the job to then be able to cooperate.
Yeah, no, some of us work with the government. I was always with city. I ended up with being in charge of all the planning in the town of Oslo. But then there was
planning for what?
Well, there was one. This lady I mentioned, she was consultant for cemeteries. And she traveled around the country and gave people advice how to landscape cemetery. And the cemeteries in Norway are so beautiful, you know. You won't believe it, the way that the monuments are designed. We had a competition about designing a monument, which we have some architects. And then we several new cemeteries was given out for competition. And then the Germans had, after the war, the Germans had done a lot of damage, you know, to schools and things like that. And there was also competition about landscaping. And then in the northern part of Norway, there was a number of towns that was bombed by the Germans. Narvik and a lot of other towns along the Norwegian coast. And then we were asked to go up there and make up some plans for what to do, how to lay out. It was completely bombed, you know. All buildings were gone. So that was things that we did. Beside being, you know, park plan. We were really park planners.
Were you?
Yeah.
And you were in Oslo
during
the war.
Yeah.
Actually, during the
war.
Right. What kind of work did you do in Oslo during the war? That was park planning then? Or?
Yeah, there was very little park planning. It was mostly cemeteries, designing cemeteries. Yeah. Number of the graves and everything.
Helping getting the vegetable garden.
That was the other things that that we worked on.
Isn't that interesting? Sort of food and burial. Not a happy.
And then when the war was over and we got a budget to work with, you know, then we did an awful lot of new landscaping.
And where did that money come from? Where would that budget have been?
There was the city of Oslo.
Really?
Yeah, they had a fairly large budget.
Would there have been international aid for the reconstruction of Norway?
No, not
No?
that I know of. There was all done by Norwegian money, I guess.
Uh-huh. So then from 45 until 1957, that's what you did then. You worked with...
Well, then I got a job as a teacher. That's the same school as I went to in the beginning. I was a teacher, and I teach landscaping and forestry or about trees and shrubs and things like that. So, and I was there quite a few years. And beside that, this school was only in the wintertime, 6 months in the wintertime. In the summertime, we were free. And then I tried to operate a landscape architect office, you know. Sure. And I had quite a few nice jobs and traveled a lot around the country. And there was a few very rich people. There were ship owners that couldn't afford to have, not just have landscapers, but then artists in to make fountains and things like that. Wheels of blue water up in the air and things like that, you know. So I think you know, I had continue as teacher full time and quit landscaping, or the other way around, you know. I never really decided because things came one after the other.
What was the name of that school?
The Statens Gartnerskole, Gardener School, the government gardener school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and where I was a teacher later on, yeah. And did it's I think it is similar to All's, very, very similar to All's. Their courses, yeah, very same type of school that All's. But by the way, I also have a grandson who wants to be a nurseryman, and he is taking apprenticeship, and he's applied to come in for All's.
Oh, good. So good. Isn't that nice?
Yeah, I should mention that later.
What's he going to take at Olsen?
Just common horticulture. Yeah, yeah. You can special there in machine repair and all kinds of things. Yeah, so this is the situation, and there at the same time, we raised 5 children, and you know, they were in. When we left Oslo, they were teenagers, and we went to Canada. Suddenly we decided to go to Canada. It was not suddenly, because the way it happened was that I was appointed Norwegian delegate to the first IFLA meeting. And I had this speech that I show you here. Yes. And I got to know a lot of people, but between them was some Canadians. And one of them, his name, I have it here, Edwin K.
Oh, sure.
Do you know the name, I guess?
I know the name. It's in that brochure that I've given.
Oh, is that one? Yes. But Edwin K. Had an office in Oslo. And he said, we need so badly people with an education in landscape, not just gardeners, but education in landscape. Come to Toronto. He wrote me a letter and said I was welcome to work in the office in Toronto. And one day we decided we'll go to Toronto. But before that, I had a friend who emigrated to Canada and settled down in Vancouver. His name was Brodersen. I don't know if you know the name. No, but he was not really a landscape architect. That was he had a chip on his shoulder, and he never managed to go to university. But he he was a very good gardener and designer, and he designed a number of projects. He was involved in this fund there, the premier, the former premier fund, that Dutch with a Dutch name, in Vancouver.
Van der Zam.
Van der Zam, yeah.
Yes.
He was involved with Van der Zam in making this
The
fantasy garden. Yeah,
was
he was the one who made the fantasy garden, and he had many other projects. But he wrote to me time after time, come to Vancouver. I need a landscape architect. I have a number of projects that I can't have. He worked very well with Tattersfield and yeah, that was Tattersfield and a number of other landscape architects that was out there. And I never managed. I just, well, I'll be coming, but I have some things to do first. No, we had 3 boys, and in Norway you have to go and have a year of military service. And we decided we'll go to a country where there's no military service, because you know it's
not when you live through the war.
No.
That's right.
So we decided to. Yeah, I was also involved with Bergen, the second nearest town in Norway, Bergen, where IFLA had their last meeting.
Oh.
And I should have gone to that meeting, but I was in Costa Rica then, so I didn't. Yeah, but this is the way it happened. I met Edwin Kay. He gave me this letter, and I had it in the pocket for 2 years, I think. So no, we are going. We're going. And then the boys were already teenagers, and the 2 oldest ones, they went out on these whaling expeditions that Norway have. You go down to the South Pole and you shoot whales and you hold them up in a big ship and you cook them into oil and things like that. They were on southern expedition. Come home with plenty of money in the pocket, you know.
Sure.
But then we had already gone to Canada, so they came after. No, what I did when I come to Canada, I had only one of the boys with me, 3 boys, and we got a room in Dundonald Street, and I went to see Mr. Edwin Kay, and he had been in a car accident, and he was in hospital, and he had no job to offer, you know. He had an office girl, and that was all. Later on, he offered me to buy his practice, but I didn't have that kind of money, you know. So I had to look for another job, and I got in touch with some of the people in Toronto. There was Dunnington, Grubb and Stenson, and there was Austin Floyd, and there was the Hancocks that had this big company, project planning. All of them I worked for a couple of months in the summer when it was very busy, you know, but there wasn't any permanent job, and I didn't make so much money that I could feed my family. But then there's a couple of a company in Toronto that's called Principal Investment, yeah. Principal Investment. And they were looking for a kind of a horticulturist that could do everything that had with landscaping to do in their shopping center. And they built an awful lot of shopping center, first in Ontario and then in Edmonton. Yeah, big shopping center in Edmonton we built, you know, and in Calgary and in Vancouver, and finally in Regina. And in Regina I stayed for quite a long time, because what happened with this shopping center? In order to get permission to build a shopping center, they had to present a landscape plan, and they had difficulty finding a landscape architect. So my job was to draw up a plan. We have to plant trees, for instance, in the parking lots, how to plant flower beds in the storefronts, and so on. So I got a job with them, and I think I used some of my experience from Norway to improve the conditions with the shopping center. For instance, I designed flower urns that we planted with flowers and moved them out, So one day there could be 5 new, and then we made beds, large beds on the storefronts and things like that. But the shade trees on the parking lot was really the most important. And in addition to that, they had a number of office buildings on University Avenue in Toronto, and different places in Hamilton and in different, yeah. So I traveled I had to buy a car, and I had to travel. And then we had 2 shopping centers in Ottawa, Carling Shopping Center, and the other one was Billings Bridge. Yeah, and they were just under construction that I came in, and I had everything to do with landscaping there. So I traveled regularly, and there I went to see Mr. Wood. Did you know Mr. Wood?
I know the
And
name.
he was so nice, He took me around to all the parks and up in the Gatineau and everywhere. So this is something I do every time I come to a town and I have some work to do. I find out in the phone book what landscape architects are there, and I phoned them and said, if you are going to have a meeting, I can come to the meeting and give you some information. Especially from Jamaica and South America and things like that. So, but I did that in Ottawa, and I did that in many places. Calgary, there was no landscape architects in Calgary at the time, but now there is many, I understand.
Yes,
yeah. And Vancouver, as I said, I met some of the landscape architects there. Vad ska vi se? Another thing I did was to go to Guelph and got to know the people there, the teachers. They didn't have a landscape architect course yet. No, but they, I think it was a Cameroon man that was one of the first teachers there, and they started a course. So I took a course in continuing education in in horticulture with a major in landscape construction, landscape construction maintenance, everything. And that helped me a lot, because as soon as I came to Saskatchewan, I applied for a job with the Department of Natural Resources, a park planning job. And they were in a very difficult situation because they didn't have a landscape architect. And there are 20 parks that were just opened up, but there were no plans. They didn't know how to lay out campgrounds and things like that. So that was my first project in Regina, was with the Department of Natural Resources. But the reason I got that was they phoned Guelph, and they asked if they know me, and they recommended me, and I had a job.
And Guelph, you did the work at Guelph when you were still with the Principal Investment Company. You decided to do
there's
that.
a shopping center there.
That was important something else that you wanted to learn.
Yeah.
In order to
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Were you registered as a landscape architect in Ontario when you worked with Principal Investment?
Well, that was the difficult thing, you know, that they had an organization that was Canadian Association of Landscape Architects and Town Planners.
Yes.
And Dunnington Grubb was the top man there, you know, and he didn't allow any other in. There was 5 or 6 of them, and no one was accepted. That I applied for membership, and I just get a slap in my face, you know. That was all there was. So, but then this Brodersen, he was in Vancouver, and he was secretary of the Landscape Architect Organization, and he also taught Brodersen, Einar Ibsen Brodersen was his name.
Yes, yeah,
You have heard the name, I
yes.
guess, but he's dead now. But he also taught landscaping at the Technical Institute, and he did a lot of radio and newspaper work and so on. That was something that I did, and I should mention that before, but I did that in Norway when I was a teacher. I had columns in 2 or 3 papers and a kind of something, a periodical that is printed like that, and I had some good pictures. I had a rule of take pictures of every. Yeah, that is one thing. In Sweden, I learned that when you do a project, you draw up a plan, a working plan, you know, and it can't be, you know, sometimes it can't be very exact and it can't be very pretty looking. But then when you have finished the project, you sit down and you draw it up in ink, and you end up with plans like this, you know. Yeah, and I always tried that. Never really managed to do that. But of course, I had files, and I had all my projects in files. And often you work on a project and you drop it, and then some years after they come back and want to have more. So this is valuable.
So then when you were with Principal Investment and you were traveling around and you came to Regina, was that what attracted you to this area, or how was
no, it was just
the fact that
it happened that way. I was looking for some other job, you know, because for one thing, the Principal Investment was owned by 3 brothers Bennett. They were Jewish and had very much to do with you know, Seagram and those people, you know. Lots of money. They bought up properties all over the project. They designed shopping centers and designed office buildings. And they had their own architects, their own engineers, their own staff, maintenance staff and so on. They didn't have a horticulturist, and that's what I fit in. But then the year that I come out here, that was in 1960. Yeah, this is 60 we come out here. And I came first, and I started working with natural resources. And I did a lot of training up north. We had 3 or 4 projects that we worked on. One was the regular parks, which was, I think, 15 parks, and historic parks, and ordinary parks, and then there was a project, number 1 highway, Trans-Canada Highway landscaping, and there we put in campgrounds, picnic places, and resting areas. With a certain distance between them, we went out and we looked at the property, and we offered the farmers money, you know, to buy their property, and we had a complete set of just like they have in Alberta, you know, a complete set of, you travel, say, 3 hours, and there is a station, and there is a toilet, and there is water, and there is everything you need. So that was one project that we did, and that took many, many years, 5 or 6 years. And then we have had a project, Roads to Diffenbeker var premier then, and he had a project, Roads to the Sources. And then we built, they had a crew that built roads to the sources from Prince Albert, mostly north to National Park, Vasquezoo National Park, and from there on continued to La Ronge and saying to Diane Lake and so on. There are 3 or 4 roads that start down here in, by Townsend, and then go way up north where there's mines. There's a number of mines that has opened up fairly recently, but there was more for tourists to go in there, and forestry. They took off a lot of forest out in this area. So our job was to work with the engineers and make roads into lakes. There is a number of lakes up there, and one of the roads is called Hansen Lake Road. That goes all the way to Flin Flon. And there was 4 or 5 of the big lakes there where we made roads into. We made parking lots, we made boat launching pads and toilets and everything that the tourists need. So that was one project that took us many, many years and times that you have to stay in there for months at a time, and sometimes you have to get home once in a while. So when we were finished with the job, at 5 o'clock, we jump in the car and we drove and drove and drove. We would be home at 1 or 2 o'clock. Yeah. This happens often.
Now that was during the work with the Department of Natural Resources, as well as when you were with the Public Works?
There was an overlap there, because we have this thing, Vascana Center. You heard from Jack Walker, you heard everything about it.
No, I haven't talked to Jack.
Oh, you haven't talked to him? Yeah, he'll tell you everything. But there, Joe Moran, who is Joe Moran, he's honorary member, I think, of Klubben, because he gave some of the landscape architects plenty of jobs, What I said, that's interesting. What I said, Vascana Center had a committee, and they said, who is the best landscape architect in the world? Well, we thought about it, and we said some of the landscape architects in California, and he mentioned
Tommy's Church.
Yeah, Church, Thomas Church. Well, we'll call Thomas Church. Pay $100 a day, and but then there was to detail. There was an architect was a landscape architect, I think, in when he was finished with his plan. It's a nice plan, and Jack Walker have that plan on his wall, I think. Yeah. So Joe Moran took over the administration of Vascana Center, and his job as horticulturist was open, So they said, we won't hire anybody, we just move you over to that job because you are a horticulturist and you can do our job. And there was a fairly large amount of designing because we had about 40 different buildings. There was land titles offices, there was courthouses, You have the same in Alberta, I'm sure. And they were all built and landscaped during the 30s. And we have this Mawson, that landscape architect from England that came in and did Vascana, that time Vascana Center. He did also some courthouse, 2 or 3 courthouses and land titles offices. How you do them? You make a parking lot and you plant some trees around, and you plant a hedge of Karagana outside, and you plant a few lilacs and different. They followed his plan for all these 40 projects, you know, and they were in an awful shape when I came here. You know, the Karaganas worse than the ones here, you know, worse than my Karaganas, and I just have to cut out an awful lot of trees and shrubs, and I didn't even have a budget, you know. I did it on maintenance cost, and we had in which building we had a caretaker, and I took these caretakers, the 40 caretakers, into Regina, gave them a course in basic landscaping, and explained to them how to make lawns, how to plant flowers, how to select trees and shrubs. And we have a problem. You have the same problem, that we don't have any trees really to plant. We used to have elm trees, and we planted elm trees all over, you know. And then the elm disease came, and I had that. We lived in Don Mills, and the whole Don Valley, you know, was full of dead trees. So I explained to them that we can't plant elm trees. We can plant green ash, and we can plant linden trees, and we can different kinds of maples and things like that. So that was a problem, to plant in some new trees that you know, that eventually took over. So that was one. Then they built a few new buildings. They built a courthouse in Saskatoon. They built also in Regina, and they built new office buildings here and there. And then I had to work with the architects and draw up a landscape plan. So, but that was one thing, that I was paid as a horticulturist. I never get paid as a landscape architect. And that had influence on my pension, you know, that I didn't get nearly as much pension as I should have. But I worked with them. Every year I complained that I should be in a different class, but it never worked.
Were you a member then of the Saskatchewan Association?
They hadn't started yet.
Oh, it hadn't started.
No, they hadn't started yet. I was a member of the Vancouver or BC Landscape Architects. And that was, I should mention that later on, but that was a very interesting period, because they had the same problem in the States that they have in Canada. There was a little landscape organization in Washington and those around there, and then they didn't take in new members. We are 10 or 12 landscape architects here, and we are American Association of Landscape Architects. We don't take in the new members. So all the members in BC, and also from Burl Marx was one of our members, and a number of other people got together. I think Brodersen was the one that stood behind it. We have to have a landscape organization, and the shame that we can't be member of the Toronto organization. So there was the same down in the States, that the landscape architects on the West Coast started their own organization, and they called it American Association of Landscape Architects.
Institute, was it? American Institute?
Institute, yeah, right. Yeah, and we had a number of meetings. Every year we got together in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego, and other towns, you know. And we met these people. They was very, very nice people, and we enjoyed this very much.
Gunter Schock was a member of that group.
Yeah, yeah.
From Winnipeg, and Phil Tattersfield.
Yeah, yeah.
Clive Justice.
Yeah, Clive Justice, yeah.
Yeah.
Clive Justice was the one that I missed most to do it, because he came to Saskatchewan and did landscaping architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And he designed a number of hospitals and schools and things like that. And when I started, they said, we can't use him anymore, you take over. So I had him here, and we went around and looked at places, and I went to Vancouver, and he invited me to his home, and he showed me all his projects and things like that, you know. So I have very, but I know him from before, because he was together with an American landscape architect. His name was Ernst down here. Yeah. Never mind. I'll mention it. He called the company for many years.
And Webb.
Yeah, that's right. Webb was made in too, but there was
somebody else in there.
Yeah, Clive Justice, Tattersfield.
John Neal.
No, he was a horticulturist, and I had. We went to, when we were in Montreal, you know, John and I went out to the botanical garden, and he told me a lot of interesting things. And I also visited him at the university. No, but you know, the whole slew of landscape architects in Vancouver were members of that organization. And I had difficulty attending meetings, you know, but I was appointed to take care of Saskatchewan, you know. The years that I worked in Norway, I say, was very, very interesting. The thing, I was a teacher, and I was a landscape architect, and I had connections with all the landscape architects in the Scandinavian countries. I worked very much in Sweden and Denmark, and they were fantastic. There were some schools of landscape architect that was very, very high quality. In Sweden, this Sven Hermlin that I mentioned, he was the top landscape architect, of course, and his speciality was to restore old historic site, in Sweden. In contrast to Norway, Sweden has a high society. You know, there is the for one thing, was it behind the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Committee, and all the leading people, lawyers, engineers, teachers here, they are in a committee like that, which called the 18 in Sweden. And many of them own big properties out in the country with big houses. And there's the same in Denmark. In Norway, very few of them. But in Sweden and Denmark, there is what they call when they are counts and nobility. Yeah, the nobility was a typical the job that we had to restore old properties like that, and then Sweden is a very industrial country. They have large factories, like car factories, and telephone. LM Ericsson telephone company that sells telephones over here, all over, and things like that. And some of these people have lots of money, and they do a lot of landscaping, which they don't do in Norway. And in Denmark is more artistic. See, there was a professor with the name Sørensen, CTO Sørensen. He was very fine landscape architect, and he got a lot of younger people interested in landscape architecture, and they're very much at designing, like when they do what they call Victory Garden, a lot of small plots, they do it in circles, things like that, they plant hedges in circles and things like that. And well, it has to do with architecture and interior architecture too. The Toronto courthouse was designed by a Danish architect. The down in Australia, the big opera house in Sydney was designed by a Danish architect. Danish architects have really been leading all over the world. So this is, besides that, landscape architects are following the same lines, And I have an awful lot of pictures, but I don't get time to show you some pictures now. I've shown them in the landscape architects course here several times. My last one was a trip to Norway I did 3 years ago, and I took a lot of pictures from parks and gardens and things.
And so the reason you're telling me this, is this the kind of influence then that you tried to bring to Saskatchewan?
There was a couple of things we worked on more than others. There were playgrounds, and what we call adventure playgrounds. This CTO Sørensen, he made one that is well known over the whole world. It's an area about my property here, and then there's a soil border round, so you can't get out, and planted the trees and so. And in there, the kids are free. They get hammers and saws and things that they can build houses, and they can do all kind of funny things. They can plant flowers, and they can do everything, and that is what's called the adventure playground. And English people were very interested in this. They went to Denmark, and they took up the ideas about. Another thing is street furniture.
Oh, yes.
Beautiful designing of street furniture. And flower urns and benches and garbage cans and things like that, that they have designed. And other things like that, flower arrangements. They were very good at flower arrangements. And flowers were grown in baskets in greenhouses, and then put out, when they're flowering, they're put out in the park. The whole border, perennial borders like that.
And that's like you were saying at the shopping center, where you would have bigger.
That was one thing that I introduced, and I know a lot of landscape architects come looking at it, and they copied it, and the benches, permanent benches and things like that.
And did you use the idea of the adventure playgrounds? Did you do that here at all?
Yeah, we had about 15 parks, I think, and in every park we made a play. We'll look at one today. We made a play, and we had every year. I had some assistants, so mostly students from the university in Saskatoon. Some of them took geography, and they eventually sidetracked into landscape architecture. We have 2 or 3 of them here now. And we sent one of them to Sweden. His family came from Sweden, and we sent him to Sweden, paid for his travel back and forth, and he picked up an awful lot of ideas. Then one of them was the adventure playgrounds and daycare centers, and everywhere the schools and schoolyards and things like that. You see, every schoolyard you see some of these play equipment that's designed in Sweden. They don't, I think they just imported the drawings and made them. They didn't even design them. There's 3 or 4 different outfits that make playgrounds, and I had to do with them. Every shopping center, we had we bought playgrounds. We had all kinds of. We introduced them in the shopping center. Later on, they put them in the park here and everywhere, and they've been copied. And I know there was a Swedish landscape architect that went to New York, and he worked with some of the architects down there, and it spread from there, I think, all over the States and to California and everywhere. But that was, when the time that I come to Canada, this was unknown here, There was only iron teeter-totters and swings. That was all, yeah. And then we had this playground equipment salesmen that came to your office, regularly. And some of them that has a lot of money invited out to a dinner. And then when we came to the dessert, what should it be, number 1, number 2, or number 3? Yeah.
With dessert, what will you order?
Yeah. No, we mostly manufacture them ourselves, and here in Saskatchewan, I had done that. I have had Indians manufacturing play equipment.
You did?
Yeah.
Where was that?
Up north, I have.
You would design it then?
Yeah, I designed it. We went into the forest and cut down trees and took the bark off and made play equipment.
My goodness.
Yeah. Yeah, so there was, but that is later on that I have worked with the Indians, because firstly I worked with, as I say, these programs that we have, way to the sources, the highway sites.
Yes.
And then there was a number of hospitals and schools and things that we did landscape architecture, I worked with. Yeah.
What do you feel personally are your contributions then to the profession here in Saskatchewan? Do you feel it's...
Well, I think it's more details. The large layout for a park is fairly easy. The first thing you do is you make roads and parking places and swimming pools and things like that. Then you make the details, and that is, as I say here, design furniture and things like that, and layout, nature trails, and things like that. And we had so many parks. The best ones, I think, was Cypress Hills, which is a beautiful park, and that has been redesigned 2 or 3 times after my time. And then we have Duck Mountain, which is up by Kamsack, and then there's Moose Mountain, that is Kenosi. And all of them was not designed at all when we went in. We had to make the roads, we had to have new buildings, and the plantation and the trees were overgrown. So we had to plant. We planted we planted millions of trees, especially up by Lake Diefenbaker. We planted large areas of trees, and by Long Lake we planted thousands of trees, and then when they grow fairly big, they grow too close together. We take a planting machine, take them out and move them to other parks. And that here in the valley, we had that all the time. That was one of the things. The maintenance of these parks was important too, of course. And there, the first thing we did was establish a plantation, holding plantation, where we could take trees and bushes out and plant them. And then we wanted to each park to have a swimming pool, and because the water is not clean here in the valley. You see those 5 lakes. They're all in the winter time. In the summertime, they go full of. We have those 5 lakes here. They grow full of algae and things like that, and we try to make sand beaches, to prevent algae growth and so on. But we have to have a swimming pool because people come up with the water and full of algae, and they, for children, we like to have a swimming pool, and they've done that in a number of parks. Things like that, with one park at the other, we do the same thing. And people appreciate it, I think, and there's an awful lot of visit to the parks now.
When you were saying a little while ago about being employed as a horticulturalist, but actually working as a landscape architect.
Right.
And you said that if you had been a landscape architect, it would have made a difference to your pension. Do you think that it would have also made a difference to the profession in Saskatchewan if you had been classified as a landscape architect? Do you think that it would have increased the profile of landscape
Well,
architects?
I think people didn't care about that. I did an awful lot of work with the highways, for instance, planting of clover leaves and planting of lines of trees. When you come down there, you passed a group of trees. Then you drive a little bit, another group, then another group. And I planned all those together with the local engineers, of course. And then public health, they had at that time something we call Fort Sand. We'll go there in the afternoon if you have time. And that was a recreation home for invalid, And now it is just a commercial hotel, and they hired it out to the Marines, and there's Marine station out there now, and we can just go out and have a look at it. There we did an awful lot of landscaping, and other departments, if they needed a landscape architect, they just called us, And the other people that worked with the park was foresters. Yeah, they had 3 foresters that did landscape architecture, park planning, really. And that was, they didn't have the background, and some of the bigger projects they just put aside because we will get a landscape architect to do now. Or Clive Justice came here and he did a little bit. When Vascana Center started, I told them they had this architect from down to California, and they also have the one from Chicago, I think, or they had another. But Jack Walker can tell us everything about that. Yeah, and
Clive Justice was part of that too.
Clive Justice had done an awful lot of planning. I don't know exactly what, but he has been involved in that too. So that is about the situation.
Okay.
Yeah, we have. Early work experience. I mentioned that to you about Sweden. I stayed in Stockholm for several years. They had a office, landscape architect office, and took in young people, have them for 2 or 3 years, and they went to this school in Skåne in southern Sweden, there was a very similar course to the one I went through. In Denmark, it's a little different because there is an art academy, where they have a professor in landscape architecture, and that is very outstanding. The one that is there now, he had practice with Sven Hermelin and went to Germany, and he was called back as professor in landscape architecture. He's an outstanding landscape architect. Then they have agriculture college, exactly same as in Ottawa, and they have a school in landscape, in gardening, horticulture, and landscape architecture. And
In
some
Toronto, do you mean?
no, this is in
Ottawa?
Denmark, in Copenhagen.
No, but you said it's the same as in Ottawa or in Toronto?
Yeah, Ottawa has
Oh, do they?
Ottawa have their experimental farm, you know.
Yes.
They're out by it's outside the town. But anyway, they have the same course in landscape architecture there, but it's more. One is more architectural. The other one is more agricultural, and that I think that is one of the problems here in Canada too. That is an answer to some of these questions. That some of us has a horticultural background, some of us has a strict architecture background. I often visit. No, I have a son who lives in Guelph. He's a director of veterinary science there, and I visit him once in a while. Especially when we go to Jamaica, we always stop there, and there I visit Cameron Mann, and he is an architect as well as a landscape architect, and his first job was in Kingston, Jamaica. When right out of school, he went to Kingston, Jamaica, took a job with an architect, an American architect there. You know, they have very few Jamaican architects. They have number of. One is who is a real Jamaican. He went to he has a degree in architecture from Canada anyway. So, but Cameron Mann told me a lot about Jamaica, about Kingston especially, and what is they are doing in landscaping. And they very, very little, of course. They don't have a landscape architect in Jamaica at all. And the people like me can go down there and do a little work and go back again. Yeah. Tattersfield have been there several times, and also this Cameron. No, I have difficulty remembering the name. There's several people that do work outside Canada. And
when was that you went to Jamaica? 1977?
Yeah. Yeah, that was after I retired, 77. I worked with a couple of organizations and ended up with KESO, which is very similar to CUSO, yeah.
But with people who've had lots of experience.
Yeah.
Is there a connection with the Rotary Club?
No, not other than I am a Rotarian, and I was director for the Rotary Club here.
But it's not a program.
And they have a Rotary Foundation, and we send money to their head office in the States. And we expect to get money back when we have a project. And one of them was that if a KESO worker is a Rotarian, Rotary would eventually pay they travel back and forth.
Oh, good.
That was I got when I went to Costa Rica. I didn't understand. Everywhere I go to the Rotary meeting. I find out where the Rotary meet and then go there once a week. And I met a lot of people there, and they were Canadians and they were Americans and all kinds, you know. So that is a rule that if you are Rotarian, you go to a Rotary meeting.
You have to go every week.
Yeah, I would like to go when I am in Calgary. I like to go to the meeting there because they did a fantastic job with Jamaica. They collected books. They collected so much books that there was 3 truckloads.
Now I would appreciate if you could play.
Okay.
Yeah, we can break it. There was 3 when there was they don't have, they are English, you know, they talking a special language. What do you call that language? Yeah, mother talks it fluently. I don't understand it, but anyway, every school got a bunch of books, you know, all kinds of school books and romance and poetry and everything, you know. So I should tell them how it worked out with these 3 truckloads of books. But the influence was when I went to university and had this fantastic teacher, you know. I had 2 or 3 of them very good teachers. So they influence, you know, I have chemistry and physics in, you know, that I learned there. I remember everything about what we went through. The project that we made and what we learned. Oh, and especially microbiology was very, very important. So beside landscape architecture, but of course landscape architecture was the main project this last year especially. And the fact that I traveled much more than the other people already. I traveled in England. I worked in Somerset for a year. I traveled in Europe. I worked with the Spät company in Berlin and with their project down in Budapest. I traveled on Donau boat down Donau, you know, to Budapest, and traveled with. Then I was called home. That was in November month. I was called home to do military service. They knew the war was on, you know. Yeah. So I traveled straight home on train and boat to get home to take military service. And after that, then war came, and you know, and then I had a family and one thing and another. So that was the end of it. So that is those questions about. I don't know if you want to repeat that about people you work with. Here was mostly Clive Justice, I think, that I worked with very much because he had this job before, and he introduced me to all the projects. He invited me to Vancouver, and we went out and saw some of his projects there and so on. So, and other than Mac Hancock, he won't even remember me, I think, but he took me out and showed me some of his projects, and I visited his father. You know, he was a fine old gardener. Yeah. He grew rhododendrons and azaleas and things there, and so on. And his brother too. He was a nurseryman. And then Clive Justice, Mark Hancock, and then there was. Now, besides that, it was mainly the engineers and the architects that I worked with, especially architects. I worked with a number of, both in the government and privately, I worked with a number of architects, and some of them were Norwegian, you know. That was the interesting thing. So that's about it. Yeah. That is who were the individuals, what was important about them to you. yeah, for landscape architects, it was very important to be a businessman at the same time as a professional, you know. And the ones that make it well, they are all business people, or they have a wife who runs a business, or something like that. You know. So that is very important. And that was the only thing I said about what was important. But of course, there is a lot of trends. Had been a lot of for the years that you and I have been in landscaping. There's been a lot of trends. Some of them come out of California, some of them come from Europe, and so on, and some come from studying landscape history. It was a very interesting thing that happened in Jamaica, because there was a team of landscape architects from down south, one of the southern states, that went around to different countries. They went to Jamaica, they went to Mexico, they went to several places, and they gave a 3 weeks, 4 weeks course in landscaping. And they, for one thing, they in landscaping history, and then they had the roads, landscaping along highways, and then they had all ordinary landscaping at the townhouse and things like that. Something about parks and things. It was quite interesting. I don't think the Jamaicans really caught everything. At least with things like landscaping of highways, that's completely out of reach. You know, the roads themselves are so bad in Jamaica. You realize that, I think. And now the pavement is broken up many places.
Yes.
And and then they drive like mad, you know, when they have a chance. Yeah. And this was a sign at our careers that said, undertakers, low overtakers.
What's that?
Undertakers, low overtakers. An overtaker is one that tries to go past you.
That's right.
Yeah. But I think you can read a lot about these questions in this. That, yeah. And then the question about environment and landscape architect influence on environment. That was very early yet. That has just come up the last few years, you know. So I don't think Peter. Yeah, he's the one who has specialized in Montreal, Peter
Jacobs.
Yeah. So he has given some lectures and so on about that.
Yes.
But I had that very much in Jamaica, because garbage, you know, what they do with the garbage. Each hotel has a room, and they just push everything into the room, and once a week they take all these cans and boxes and drive it to the dump. And that dump is just by the highway, you know, so it smells a long way. And I try to teach them to, and then, of course, leaves and branches and things like that, they just throw over the edge, you know. It's up on the hill, and they throw, So I try to teach them to make compost and take care of garbage and things. They don't know how that works. I had too short time over that, I think. But there are many things that, you know, permanent problems that are difficult to solve without, especially if there is no professional people around.
Have that kind of training. Yeah. What do you think is the future of landscape architecture, either here in Saskatchewan or within Canada? What do you think that the future holds?
Well, if we see the way that landscape architects have developed in Europe, especially in Scandinavian countries and England and Switzerland, there is a great future for improvement of the landscape itself, planting of trees, and especially here on the prairie, we need an awful lot of trees, and that is one thing that we have worked with a lot to get people to plant trees. And government grow the trees and give it away, but very few people really realize that. So we have done that with every government building. We have a holding plantation, and we get a couple of hundred trees and we plant them out, look after them, and in a few years you have a large, nice tree. But in the future, I believe that there is big possibilities. Like I think of Ingrid, my nephew in Vancouver. She has a good background now. She has worked with a nursery with this company that the premier, the premier,
Yes,
Van Sam, yeah. She worked with them, and then she got her job with Van Dusen Garden, and then all the time she's going to university in UB and taking first start in agriculture, then they gradually come into horticulture, then landscape architecture.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's any idea to go to Vancouver. They have a good school in landscape architecture and Moira Quayle?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Moira is a very good teacher, And I think that when I come out there, I'll take Ingrid with me out and have a talk with Moira about what the best thing to do from now on. What the best thing in order to be a landscape architect, what she should. She can go to Guelph. My son lives in Guelph, he can live.
Sure.
And they have a good school. And then Victoria, even Montreal, but there you have to take it in French, I guess. And well, she'll be in 30 years, so she'll have to take some decisions, I guess. But anyway, I think the future is good for those young people. There is, of course, every town and every district has a landscape architect. And that is something I have worked with here, that we have in this district between Regina and Yorkton, we have a number of small towns, just like Fort Capel, and they have the same problem about street trees, for instance. They planted rows of street trees and they are overgrown and they don't understand how to cut them down and replace them and things like that. And there's very little park other than Kiwanis has a park, Rotary has a park, but there is no proper park in most of this town. And I thought if somebody even got an agreement with the town council that he would look after these things, that would be a future. In Norway they have that. I mentioned about the cemeteries. They have a landscape architect that look after cemeteries, and every cemetery is just beautiful, Apparently they have a budget so they can spend a little bit of flowers and arrangements and things like that. And then the basic thing is to look after trees. And there is foresters that, in England, each town has a town forester. But, that is an additional job. It is not easy to open up on. That's a question of money. But there is a problem about small places and the park. We call it park politics. What they can do with small, with cooperation. We have here in Fort Capel, there was a river that came down the hill and ran straight out in the lake there. So they closed that river and they put it through here and ran out in that lake, the lake you see here. and then there's this deep valley. Yeah, yeah. There's this deep river valley that is been sitting there for nothing. No, I suggested that we make a park out of it. There are beautiful big trees, and Kiwanis offered to do the work. So I worked the whole summer and fall to make that plan. We can look at it when we come out there. I don't know. They haven't maintained it properly, but because then the city has to maintain it, and they have no town gardener or anything like that, you know. And they have a recreation officer, and he is the one who makes football fields and things like that, athletic fields, and he does it in an awful way, but just putting fences around and no planting, no landscaping, nothing, you know. So that is the same in every town in Saskatchewan, that they have they lack little professionalism.
And is that what you tried to do in your time in the government, was to try to establish landscape architecture in the smaller communities?
Yeah, that was I did for 15 years. I did that, and I think I managed fairly well. When I retired, they hired three people after me.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
With all with the educators and landscape architects.
How do you think that landscape architecture has changed from when you started here in Saskatchewan till now? Do you see that the profession has changed a lot?
Yeah, that's one thing. We work much more with details, really. So that I said, I have from Europe with playgrounds and street furniture and proper facilities for sports and things like that. I regret that I haven't got through more facilities for what you call it. Well, running, jumping, and throwing the athletic fields.
Yes.
There are very few. And horse race tracks. I have made a number of horse race tracks in the Indian reserves.
Oh.
Because they raise horses and they want to race them, you know. And then the same in Indian reserve. We are going to drive through a reserve, and they kind of poor looking, you know. Houses are not maintained, and they have a big barn that they use for dancing and things like that, you know. And then there is no facilities for young people to do anything really. And that is what we try to correct by every school. We have a stadium with a 400-meter track and facilities for throwing and jumping and so on. And they have competitions. They have every year they have an Indian competition between the different Indian groups, mostly connected with schools. So.
And you were saying that you also with the Indians, was this on reservations? And you said that you got them to actually make some of the playground equipment?
Yeah.
What could you describe that?
I can show you some pictures of it. Yeah, well, we went out in the forest and got them to cut down trees and take the bark off and let them dry. And then we made a swing would be two like this and two in the other end, and then a log on the top, dug down in the ground, or cemented down in the ground, a proper rope and a board, you know, and that was a swing. And you can see down here, when we go down in this valley, they have made a slide down the slope so that you get down, they can just slide into the playground. and things like that.
Was it just on the reserves that they made the play equipment, or did they make it and did you use it in other places?
No, unfortunately, but I have used that model, you know, and I tried some places to do the same thing in ordinary playgrounds.
Sure, but it didn't happen.
Yeah, that's about it.
So do you see that there's a pretty good future for landscape architects in Canada?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, that is. There's very much work to do that is undone, you know. But as I said, in Norway, they had, when I left, there was about the same situation. There's another thing that they have in the Scandinavian countries and in Germany, and that is small, you can call it, kolonihavet, it's called kolonihavet. There's an area divided in small lots. Everybody gets a lot, and you build a little house, and you plant trees and shrubs, and you grow some vegetables and things like that. In Stockholm, for instance, that was something I worked with the whole year. And I even lived in one of those small houses, you know, when we were newlywed. And we enjoyed that very much and got to know the neighbors and had coffee with them and things. And I tried to teach them a little bit of fertilizer and watering and the different kinds of fruit trees they can grow, things like that. So, but in every town in Norway, and the same in Germany, Germany is mostly along the railroads. There is some vast land, and people just move in there and build a cabin, and they grow some flowers and things. But in Norway, in the Scandinavian countries, is very much regulated. As I say, in Denmark, there's that one that is made in circles. Each family has a circle, a house in the middle, and a hedge around. Things like that.
And is that something that you think should be used in Canada? Is that
for people who live in apartments and have no ground at all? It's a good thing for a family to have a place like that, you know. They can bicycle, kids can bicycle out there and stay there over the weekend and things like that. But it's very much the same as having a summer house by the lake, you know. And that is what mostly here. All those lakes that show on that map, they are surrounded by houses. And they cost a little more with a shoreline. You pay so much per foot extra for shoreline, but there's an awful lot of Regina people that have lots like that. And it has to be. We did the same with the Diefenbaker Lake. That Diefenbaker Lake was dammed up, you know, in the late 60s or something. And we got the job of creating park areas and such cottage areas and harbors and things like that. And that was, and then the one thing is that the water level is fluctuating. It goes down 3-4 feet and up again. And they have the same down in North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, those countries. They have many of these lakes with fluctuating water levels, which creates a certain amount of problem, you know, by planning.
I see.
And landscape architects is little come from any country except for the States. If you have your dating, if you have your education in the States, you just belong here, you know. As a matter of fact, a number of the landscape architects have American background, or they go to Harvard, or they go to UBC or California, things like that. So, but to come here as a Norwegian without any connections, I had a little bit of connection, as I told you, with Brodersen first, and then with Edwin